one of the key things that we can do is really understand our teachings. This goes for all religions, actually, and also for the secular world, who often blame religion for problems which exist across the board.
Yeah. All right, well, for Pete's sake, we're back in Rome with our podcast. I'm your host, Charlotte Twetton, and I'm joined today by Stephanie MacGillivray. Stephanie, thank you so much for joining us. Senior officer at the Caritas International Institute, advisor, lecturer here at some of the pontifical universities in Rome, specializing in contemporary ethics and women's leadership throughout Vatican. Stephanie, thank you for joining the pod.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here.
So you originally, I was doing a little bit of a look into your background, and originally it seems like you were in musicology almost, and then shifted into, company advisement and policy advisement, which is such an interesting shift. I was going to ask, just to begin, how did that happen? And did you plan that? Was that always the long-term goal? It's an interesting strategy.
It wasn't planned at all, actually. I was music, I always say, is like my first love. And so I did my undergraduate in music, and then I did a postgraduate degree in musicology. And I was sort of all set for this academic life. But then a few things happened in my life and kind of gave me, pause for thought. Mm-hmm. And I thought, is this really what I want to be doing with my life? Or I had this kind of inner call, I suppose, to do something with a bit more meaning. And I put it in inverted commas because I think the academic world has a huge worth and meaning in itself. So it's not that doesn't have meaning. It's just that I felt this kind of need to be sort of out in the world. And I saw an internship advertised at the Catholic Bishops' Conference of England and Wales. And it was a sort of political internship where you do public affairs and policy work with them. And I thought, this sounds about right. And actually, as part of the internship, you also studied for a part-time master's degree as well in ethics. So it sort of combined all of my interests of the academic world, plus, I'm Catholic, so it was kind of that draw as well, plus politics, and something which could, have the potential to have, some kind of positive change in the world or something like that. So I applied for the internship and have worked for the Catholic Church ever since. So over 10 years now.
Oh my goodness, that's absolutely crazy, because not only did you shift careers, from musicology, and maybe there is a lot of similarities between musicology and policy that I'm unaware of, but that's a big shift. And then you went London to Rome eventually when you moved to the Caritas, foundation. That's another big shift. You're really tackling it one at a time. You went career, location, life. What was that like? What was that move? What pulled you to eventually go Rome?
It was partly personal and partly professional. All my life have always wanted to live in Rome at some point, but I sort of thought it would be, like a retirement dream or something.
Right.
But actually then it was during COVID, and I saw this job advertised for Caritas. And it was, at that time, it was to work only on women's leadership. And I thought, oh my goodness, this is sort of all of my dream things coming together, because another passion of mine, which I have worked into my musicology life and also into my, I suppose, policy life as well, is women's empowerment. And including, trying to overcome and address the barriers that women face in society. And so when I saw this job advertised, I thought, wow, well, I have to go for this. So again, I applied, and it was a pretty, some people say to me it was a pretty rogue move to during, mid-pandemic to decide to move country by myself. But, sometimes you have to take a risk in life.
Yeah, absolutely. Those big risks, they definitely pay off, I think. You moved big cultural changes right off the bat that were really difficult to overcome. Did you have any that pop out to you?
You know what? I underestimated the cultural changes that there would be. I kind of thought, London, Rome, Europe, how different can it be? Also because I knew Rome pretty well, because I used to come annually for work, and then also I just love the city, so I would come on holiday quite regularly here. However, as I say, I underestimated the cultural changes, and some of them, I sort of took this approach where, okay, I'm going to come across obstacles, but I'm really going to try and see the funny side of them instead of getting frustrated. Because a lot of people said to me, Italy, full of bureaucracy, really difficult, system to get into. And I actually thought, you know what? Okay, fine. But how hard can it be? I kind of always, that's my sort of catchphrase, is how hard can it be? And I chose to sort of see the funny side instead of getting frustrated. But yeah, what can I think of the cultural stuff? I mean, yeah, for sure, the bureaucracy. It's just learning a new system. I think that every country has its own system. Yeah. It's just about finding the information, understanding how the system works. It just works differently in every place. Yeah,
completely. It's got pros and cons in every country.
For sure.
I mean, genuinely, because I've been going through the same process, and it's so funny because it's like, oh, okay, if I was friends with you, you would do this for me in 5 seconds. And that's the biggest problem. So, like, do you want to get coffee really fast? And then we should do this later? Like, it's so familial here.
Yeah, for sure. That's true. And I was lucky, actually. I have to put my hands up and admit, I have a few cousins here who I don't know extremely well, but actually when I told them that I was moving, they kind of swung into action and took me to get my tessera sanitaria and all of this. So they were very good at helping me, and I accepted help. I think one of the key tips I would give to anyone is accept the help. If someone's willing to help you out, just say thank you. And yes.
Yeah, because that is a cultural difference.
Yeah.
I think for probably both America and England is that you're like, no, I can do it on my own. I can do everything by myself because everything's written out and it's very obvious and it's like step by step.
Yeah, but here I think there's just a more warmth, literally, but also in the people. It's a very warm people. And one thing I really noticed, I have to say, is when I arrived, decided I was going to speak Italian, and I wanted to really try to integrate myself. And so one thing I really noticed was that Italian people really appreciate when you try to speak Italian. Because even if you make mistakes, it's okay, you're trying. And that's one thing I really, really noticed.
No, it's huge. Because you'll go to other countries and you'll try to speak the language and they'd actually kind of just prefer if you got over it. And stop trying. Like, you're not going to get it. So just give up while you're ahead. You've got a language, stick with that. And here it's like, they're like, no, that's great. You're trying your hardest. I mean, I'm butchering 99% of the words right now, but at least they're happy that I'm trying, and that's all anyone can say. Wow, what an incredible move. And so you went from working with predominantly men for that, you're working with clergy, bishops in Wales and England, and then you go, all right, 180 it to Rome, change jobs, location, and I'm going to work with women now entirely. Was there anything you noticed that was just a huge difference in working with predominantly men and then predominantly women? And then also, is there that big barrier difference as well? What's that about?
So in terms of the reporting, I mean, here in Caritas, we are basically entirely, in our office anyway, entirely lay people. There aren't sort of clergy who are members of staff. And so that's kind of a difference. But to be honest with you, when I was working for the bishops, and I would have daily interactions with senior cleargy, but for me, they were people, and they didn't treat themselves as above you or me or anyone else. Of course, they are senior clergy, so they have an authority, but there wasn't a feeling of you didn't really feel that sense of hierarchy in a negative way. They were really good mentors and guides. They have their role, their leadership role. And so our job was to advise them. And it was great. But I mean, yeah, here it's very different. You know, it's an entirely lay organized. Well, as I say, our office is full of lay staff, but also very international. And this is a big difference when we have a very multicultural office, which is wonderful. And I think in the General Secretariat here in Caritas, there's sort of over 20 different nationalities or something crazy like that. But it also means you have to learn to communicate in different ways, because cultural differences in communication are huge. That's another cultural difference. Yeah. But when it's with many nationalities, you know, you have one person saying, "Oh, when you speak in that tone, I find it aggressive," but other people would say, "Oh, that's just like how we speak normally." And so that is a big difference, going from a national organization to a completely international organization. That is a huge change.
Yeah, because the communication itself has changed. That's such a massive difference. I mean, I even think here we have 3 predominant cultures probably in our studio. Americans represent the smallest proportion, but we've got like Spain, Italy, and America roughly. And Sean represents Ireland, obviously. But the communication differences are massive, even within those 4. And you'd think they're all kind of similar. You know, they're not so far apart. I mean, our languages all sort of merged at one point or the other. We've got a lot of common history, and we've got, you know, tons of wars at least we overlap in. And so you've got to say there's got to be a lot of commonality there. But no, the communication style is such a massive barrier where you're just going, you know, okay, this is the tone that I use for professional events. Oh, wow, that is very different from what you use. And you consider it rude if I don't get to your level of interest or if I don't use the tone that you use. And so being empathetic, it's such a growth in empathy as well as communication.
Totally. And also I've noticed that I speak a lot more slowly these days because not everyone's first language is English, for example. And so that's something I've really noticed. And I notice then when I meet other sort of native English speakers who speak really fast, and I say, you're gonna have to slow down because, you know, it's not fair, you know. So yeah, huge growth in empathy. But I think the important thing is to also maintain your character, because this huge diversity is so rich. And I think that instead of, you know, everyone kind of like merging and trying to become the same in terms of how we communicate or whatever, I think the best thing is to keep that, our uniqueness, but then to have the empathy and to really understand, oh, actually, if I speak more slowly, that's a kind thing to do, because then we can all understand each other better and avoid misunderstandings, which is important.
Absolutely. Yeah, because if you just understand where a person is coming from, it takes away the sort of the unintentional personal aspect to it. It becomes just, that's cultural. That's nothing to do with you and I and the relationship we have with each other. That's everything to do with where you come from, where I come from, and what the difference is. Wow, incredible. And so you work internationally, still focusing in women's rights and women's advocacy, and 20 different countries just in, when you say that, is that just within your immediate department?
Yeah, that's just in our office. I think it's around 20. I don't want to take it with a pinch of salt.
Some fact
but it's
checker.
Exactly.
Goes to the office.
Get the lie detector
Yeah,
out.
exactly.
No, but so Caritas is a global confederation with 162 members, national members, which work in over 200 countries and territories all over the world. So it's a big beast, and we're actually the second largest humanitarian and development organization in the world after the Red Cross, Red Crescent.
Right.
And so we have this huge global but grassroots reach, because the kind of unique thing about Caritas is that we are in communities all the time. It's not that, you know, a disaster happens and then we swoop in and deliver aid and then leave again. it's that we are national organizations. And so we're based in those countries with local staff. And we always say we're there before, during, and after any emergency or anything that happens in that community or society. And so, yeah, it's, as I say, it's a big machine. And it took some time to actually understand how it works and everything. But actually, it is incredible what the Caritas organizations do all over the world on a daily basis. Every country is different and every situation is different. And that's what sometimes means we sometimes take a bit of time to get to the final product, because there's a lot to go through and to understand. But actually, I love that real participation that we have in our work. We're not here in Rome telling someone what to do in, South Africa or wherever. They are independent, autonomous organizations, and we all work together.
Wow, that's incredible. And so within that, where have you seen the biggest social, political, economic barriers for women in your work? Where have you noted, okay, this is an area that's not really focused on. This is becoming a bigger issue with time, because I think a lot of people, especially maybe in America or some of the, maybe some of the Western world, maybe sort of see women's rights as like, it's kind of been done. We've done it, Like women generally, they're allowed, they're there, and they're breathing, and they're working, and they're living, and look, they're fine. We figured it out. There was a problem, sure, like 50 years ago, but now we've finally done it. We can let it rest. We don't have to keep hearing about it. But your work, I'm sure, is quite the opposite reality.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. And as you and I both know well, like that's quite a, we would say sort of global north perspective. And I know a lot of people, men and women, who say, like, just like what you said, like, what's the problem? But actually, one of the easiest ways to show where the issues are is through data and research and evidence-based research, because essentially the numbers tell you everything you need to know. I think that one of the biggest barriers that women face is culture. And in a lot of places, there are still cultural behaviors or patterns, which some are more serious than others, but they limit women a lot because it's social and it often includes a lot of stigma. And that's one of the hardest things to overcome is social and cultural kind of norms, let's say. Because, okay, you might have a big movement like the Me Too movement, for example, which did a huge amount to raise awareness about the abuse that was going on. But at the same time, that's not always going to take root, a movement like that. And also you have to have significant backing before you even get going with something like that, because it's a risk.
Right.
You're putting yourself at risk.
Right.
And so there are cultural norms which limit women a lot. Of course, there are economic rights and stuff like this, which in a lot of countries still don't exist. Places where women are still not allowed to have access to any of the finances, for example.
Right.
In a family, even though they might be the main breadwinner in a lot of places.
Right.
And so there are those kinds of barriers. Violence is something that is pervasive all over the world. From, in Italy recently, there's been I would say a wave of femicides, of young women as well. In France, you had the Gisèle Pellicot case. The British government recently called domestic abuse a national emergency. The levels are just stark. And we saw it in Caritas as well, for example, during COVID-19. All of these barriers just became even bigger, and the numbers of women experiencing domestic abuse shot up, and so there are all these sort of interlinked barriers, which I think they're kind of culturally ingrained, a lot of them. And so, as I say, I think sometimes the culture is the biggest thing to overcome or try to change. Obviously it's best if it happens in a natural, organic way. But unfortunately sometimes you do have to have something big happen to make that change happen.
Yeah, it's so true. And it's so interesting because you're right, there can be a massive movement to try to change the culture. But once that movement sort of dies out, it becomes sort of a thing of the past. And that big risk that everyone took, I mean, I think we see this in America a good bit with the Me Too movement, is now everyone goes, oh, now there's all this negative connotation almost. Yeah,
for sure. And another thing that I think ends up limiting the success of these kinds of movements is that they kind of become like a joke. And I've noticed it tends to happen with stuff that involves women. It's kind of turned into a like, oh, well, you would say that kind of thing. And I say, yeah, I would. And I think that, I think we need to take it seriously enough. You hear all these inspirational speeches, like even in the film Barbie and stuff, where you say, oh, it's impossible to be a woman. Like, I actually don't think it's impossible to be a woman. But I think that, unfortunately, sometimes the things that affect women aren't taken as seriously. But I think, actually, it comes from a place of feeling uncomfortable. Because so many people laugh out of feeling uncomfortable and to try to, like, break the tension. Because they know that, actually, it's something really serious.
Yeah. I completely agree with that, because I think, well, I'm not entirely certain, but sometimes I wonder if it has to do with a lack of solutions. If you just go, like you're saying, this is a cultural problem. This goes so deep within the society and within the economic systems and within, the very way that we interact with each other and know each other. What would it mean to try to change this? I don't even know what that looks like. And, you're terrified of being wrong and going through that entire process of attempting to change, only for at the very end of it to be right back where you were at the beginning.
Yeah, for sure. I think that, for example, in my work, we always try to take this approach of challenges and solutions. I think for sure there is a sort of, I don't think we lack solutions. I think that it takes a lot of effort, basically. And the problem is so big that it seems sometimes a bit kind of insurmountable. But I actually think starting with the smallest things, like in my old work with the bishops, I used to manage an annual grants fund, and actually the projects that we gave the smallest amounts of money to lasted the longest. And had such an amazing effect in local communities. I remember we gave a small amount, a couple of £1,000, relatively speaking, that's quite small, to a local parish who wanted to set up a monthly like mental health drop-in. And I think even today, I think it's still going. And this was years ago, and they just needed that one injection of funding, and because they were responding to a need. This is the other thing where I see people say, what can we do, there's no solution. And I said, well, what's needed?
Right.
It's not our job to sit in a cramped in an office trying to come up with solutions. Why don't you just ask someone what they need? That's like the easiest and quickest way to find out what would change the situation. And I think we're kind of going through it in the church with this like synodal process of we're more interested in listening these days than we used to be. And I hope it lasts, because, this is the real thing. What's needed and how can we meet those needs?
Yeah, absolutely. And the communication takes the fear away.
That's for sure. That's another thing. A word that I was actually thinking when you were speaking before is fear. I think that to get rid of fear, we just need to talk. Also because I think another barrier is I kind of tend to put it like the misuse of power, or the kind of misdistribution of power, let's say, as well. But with that comes a sort of fear from the people who are in power that you're kind of taking something away from them. But I think if we can change that narrative of it not being about power and fear, but to just saying like, how can we do this? How can we get the job done in the best way? And who are the right people for that? Then it becomes less about power and more about sort of collaborative working.
Yeah, absolutely. Because once you're in those positions where you're control and you have the decision-making capacity, you know, you're going to take it almost instantaneously as you're criticizing. This is, oh, everything I do is wrong. Oh, I can't do anything right. Okay, it's so much easier to give up before you even begin trying. But when you go at it and you say, I want to help you, this helps you. This is a very Catholic understanding also of how reform works, which is you don't just reform for the sake of the people who are being hurt. You reform for the person doing the hurt as well, because no one is probably in the end going to hurt more than the person who is misusing their power or misusing whatever decision-making capacity they're in. And once you can kind of get them to understand that it's also for you, and hopefully you are able to communicate that, you know, then it changes the narrative. We have a common goal. We're not against each other. We're not at the antithesis. We're actually on the exact same page, but it's very difficult.
It's a challenge, that's for sure. And actually what you've just said, it kind of comes down to the key of the way that certainly I try to work, which is you're never going to agree 100% with everybody, but that is not a reason not to work together. We need to focus on our common ground, you know, the things that we are shared goals, and how can we work together to achieve those? Because there's so many sort of silos and people saying, oh, but they say this, so I can't talk to them, and, you know, whatever. But actually, just focusing on the common areas, it's okay not to agree with everyone on everything. And also, I think that there's this kind of idea that, oh, if we work with them, but they do something that we disagree with, then we are doing it as well. And it's not like that, you know. Everyone has their expertise and their areas of work, you know, and sometimes they overlap, and that's where we should really take advantage of that overlap and the strength, because especially in today's climate, we need to work together more than ever. Yeah.
Well, yeah, the polarization of conversation was such an interesting development post-media, you know, revolution of the early 2000s. You know, we thought all of this media would produce more communication and conversation, and it did in some ways. In some ways. In a lot of ways, it's again that thing of that's them and this is me. And if I can just not look at them, if I can just choose to put them within a category and box them away, again, the easier way out, then I don't have to deal with the uncomfortable feeling that we actually do have commonality, and they are a human being. And also, they need, just as much as I do, fulfillment, happiness, and all of these various things. And we actually might be able to help each other, but that's a long and difficult process. And with phones and things of the sort, you can just curtail that communication away, and you don't even have to try. Which is where work like what you do and what Caritas does is so important, because it rises above, right? And I think Pope Leo has been so at the forefront of this, where he's even brought up, you know, the wave of femicide within Italy, even within the first week or so that he was Pope. He's very well aware of the social issues within the church. And then beyond that, he's so aware of the need to unify. And it's been such a focus of his that I think is such a great call to the world, because you don't get many leaders right now who are saying, please, please, please come together. Like, now's the time. And so to have a pope, especially for your organization, that's probably a real sign of, okay, at least we have someone leading us that we know is on the same page.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think he will have a huge impact. And I know already he's... in the world, in the many various things that are going on, he's already having such a huge impact. He worked for Caritas in Peru for a few years. So
really?
Yeah, when he was in Peru. So we're very proud of this, and very happy to have someone, you know, a pope who really understands Caritas. You know, he was in Caritas. And so he knows exactly what we do, who we are, and how we work. And I think for sure he will, we're all very optimistic about Pope Leo.
Yeah, no, it's incredible. It's so interesting. I've done so many background researches on Pope Leo, and how did I not come across? Is that a secret? No, that's not a secret.
He was in Caritas Peru for 2 years.
Oh, 2 years.
I think 2 years.
Maybe I skimmed over.
It was just before he came to Rome.
Okay.
2022 to 24.
Got it. Oh, wow. Really right before he came to Rome.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's fresh in his mind. You're like,
exactly.
hey,
Yeah.
the coffee's not cold yet.
Yeah, exactly.
Amazing. No, it is so true, because you sort of think that with the development of communication tools, that whatever differences divide us, they're going to sort of naturally dissipate. Right. Especially when we talk about women and like the differences between men and women and our complexity of understanding of what that even means, you know, especially culturally and then also morally and then as Catholics and then as just people living in personal lives as one or the other or whatever. There's so many complex answers to be had, but you would think, oh, with these communication tools, that will definitely help this conversation. We'll have clearer ideas of ourselves. We'll have a better understanding between the two genders. We'll have a more clear cultural understanding between the differences of this cultural, you know, understanding of femininity or masculinity or whatever have you. And it actually, in my at least personal experience, has almost been the opposite, which is, you know, I know in the United States it's really all I can speak to, but we have this massive problem of isolation of men and the anger of men just naturally towards women, especially online, and then what that means in real world consequences. And then women equally saying, well, that's the men we have. I'd rather actually not deal with that at all because that's terrifying. And also they hate me right off the bat. And so it's sort of been, again, that polarization isn't just political. That polarization wasn't just cultural. It's gender-based polarization. And so what do you see as the solutions to that? Because you just say communicate more, understand each other more. How do you get people to care enough to try to understand each other?
Look, it's a huge challenge, and I think it is a global one. It kind of mixes all of that political and cultural into that kind of that adds to it, and not in a helpful way. And so I think in terms of solutions, yeah, of course, if there were better communication, that would be a very easy way to solve it. But I think that every single sector of society has a role to play. I don't think it's the responsibility of one, I don't think it's only the responsibility of schools or only the responsibility of parents or only the responsibility of priests or politicians. I think it is, we have a collective responsibility with young people, young boys and young men, but also to get this kind of dialogue going with young girls and women as well. Sort of getting that sense of community again.
Right.
Because I think one of the issues that we face as well in society is loneliness. And I think that with, the internet and everything, and I'm a social media user, I'm not anti any of this at all. But I do think we need to, of course, limit our consumption, let's say, but also what we're consuming. There's so much material out there which is destructive and harmful and really feeds into the brain. And it's very, they're not called influencers for nothing. Like, they really do influence people's behavior and ways of thinking. And so I think if we took some of those online conversations into a room, sometimes you think, you would never say that to me if you were sitting in front of me like this. You can only say it because you're in the comments section, And so that's the kind of thing, is like, I think bringing us back to reality, we are real people with real feelings, and life is precious, and we should be really fully with each other, I think, in in positive ways. And, you know, when someone's facing a challenge, obviously the sort of Christian approach would be to empathize and to try to help, and not to judge. But, you know, I think coming back to those, a few more of those principles in society wouldn't hurt.
Yeah. I think about it because it sort of, the timeline sort of overlapped of social media and the development and all of that. And then at the same time, sort of a critical look at traditional mores, as Tocqueville would probably call them, but, you know, those core aspects of community, those core aspects of your identity as a person, your family. Who do you hang out with on the weekends? Where do you go to grab food? You can bike into town and get, you know, whatever from wherever, and there'll always be the same people there. So you have a reliable community you can always go to. I think that it was a sad overlap to see some of those crumble while you have this increased tick in viewership and attention online. And so, you know, traditionally the church has been one of those core foundations, if not the core foundation, of identity and feeling of purpose and feeling of unity and community. And so it makes sense that in a secular world that sort of got substituted.
Yeah, I think in the end, we live in the world we live in. I'm not advocating for a return to, you know, everyone, you know, raising their own cows and sheep and stuff, because it's impossible.
And smelly.
But I think that there are ways that, for example, the church can speak into that online culture. But sometimes I think, you know, we're sometimes maybe reticent because we don't see it as our place. But actually, it's everyone's place. You know, no one has the monopoly over it. I mean, obviously, the few people who own them do. But we have the right to use them. And so I think that we need to... It's a two-way street, essentially. And this is what I mean by saying it's everyone's responsibility as well. You know, I think that if we all really commit to saying, okay, let's try to be a kinder world. And I don't mean that in a sort of, you know, in a silly sense, or in a sort of like, how can I put it? Like I mean, politeness. Yeah, I mean it in a really genuine way. Like that we should try to be less angry and more, you know, Good Samaritan-esque, essentially. In all of our, you know, online, at work, at home, to ourselves. You know, so much anger it's so directed at ourselves, especially women, when we're expected to be 10 million things, and so therefore you end up feeling like a failure all the time because you're, you know, like maximum 2. And so, you know, I think that if we kind of had a kinder approach, that would be helpful. No,
I agree. It is true. It is interesting because also I think, you know, there is that misunderstanding a little bit about whose fight this is. You think of sexism and feminism and things of that sort, and it seems like it's one world's problem and not ours, where it's like, that's an idea for atheists, or that's an idea that's, you know, that's their thing, because, you know, you're going to have disagreements about what that means. And so rather than, again, to have that communication and that difficult conversation about what those disagreements are, you just go, it's a lot easier to just say feminism is a thing of secular world and everything else is a thing of Catholicism. And so, but it's interesting because the church has so many female leaders. You know, we have so many great examples of beautiful feminine leadership. You know, we have doctors of the church that are women. Mary, the Virgin Mary, Queen of Heaven, is well within our belief system. And so it's confusing because it seems like we should actually be probably leading it in a lot of ways because of the amount of women that have undoubtedly led the church and undoubtedly advocated for women to be seen as equal to men. But then you have this interesting cultural problem where it's a them thing, not an us thing. Where is that stemming from? Where is that misunderstanding coming from in your experience?
Well, look, I think that it comes from a variety of different places, and there are different sources for that. One of the ways that we've tried to address this in Caritas was we did a survey, and this came out that basically, like, women are facing barriers to leadership, for example, in the church and in Catholic organizations. And one of the reasons for that is that people don't really know or believe that the church does teach that women can be in leadership and decision-making positions within the framework of the church's current teaching. This is not about advocating for changing any of the teaching. It's about saying, what does the church teach, and how can we enact that in our organizations, but also how can we then, promote that in society at large. And so going back to our sort of scriptural and Catholic social teaching roots, we produced this booklet called Equality Encounter Renewal, which essentially lays out the church's teaching on women's leadership and participation in decision-making and stuff like this, paired with lots of examples and testimonies and good practices from Caritas all over the world. And so one of the key things that we can do is really understand our teachings. This goes for all religions, actually, and also for the secular world, who often blame religion for problems which exist across the board. And understanding our sacred texts, understanding our social teachings is a real... makes us so much stronger. And I always say that, religious literacy has to be part of our toolkit when we're looking at women and empowering women to become leaders or to be in decision-making positions. So I think that there's sometimes basically a misunderstanding of what the church teaches. And sometimes that's a sort of unconscious misunderstanding, or things that have been passed down for, generations. And it's just kind of like a bit like, Chinese whispers in a way, where the message gets so distorted that you don't even know what you started out with in the first place. So I think that can be something that can really, really help.
Yeah, absolutely. Going back to the text, going back to the actual belief. I find that across the board, especially we talk about, even what we do here, which is, okay, go actually read the encyclical. So many people read the article about the encyclical. And again, it's the game of telephone. You're getting it through another person. You're not getting it direct from source. So go back, and it's all religions of the world. You're going to get that issue. They're going to take it, and they're going to understand it in their own cultural context with their own biases. That's natural. Your job is to do the same. Understand it the best of your ability.
Absolutely. And there is that co-responsibility because, there are some religious leaders who, I'm not saying anything crazy, but who sometimes do even deliberately misinterpret things. Or sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's just actually saying, maybe it's this. But I think that's where we also, or sort of, let me say, people of faith also have this responsibility to read the encyclical and to really understand what that means. Yeah,
it is such a massive responsibility. The church has that responsibility, and then it also has this other aspect where we've had a history of so many issues as well. When you look at your work in Caritas for women, where do you see women needing safeguarding and protection the most?
It's a tough question. I mean, I think in a way we mirror society. And I think, where it comes to things where women are at risk, I think when there are strong policies in place, against harassment or bullying even, or things like that, I think that provides universal safeguards, but it especially means that women can feel safe. I think a lot of the time, I'm not talking about in Caritas, but I think in society generally, which includes all of our organizations. But I think that creating a safe environment is really important. And so I think that also helps with like prevention as well. You know, we shouldn't wait until something happens to say, oh, let's do something.
Right.
We should anticipate it and say, okay, let's have the protections in place. Let's have the policies. Let's understand what women or vulnerable people need in terms of, you know, be it workplace policies or anything else. You know, the biggest issue that women face in society today is violence. And so I think if there are safeguards in place which can prevent that, or when then it does happen, that the sort of woman's protection at heart, then that would be a big step forward.
Yeah, it is so interesting because it's well within Catholic teaching as well that we have this understanding of sort of the circumstance of sin, where we say it's not worth it to even put yourself in the situation, right? So if within a company, for instance, you were able to prevent even, you know, I've worked with the safeguarding institutes here in Rome, and a lot of them have this policy of just keep the doors open. You know, no, we're not saying you're going to do it. We're saying, why would you even put yourself into this situation where it could be misunderstood or anything of that sort? Better to just have the safeguards in place, because then what you're doing is you're helping to protect women, you're helping to protect the vulnerable, but you're also helping to prevent people from hurting themselves in the way of sin and in the way of, you know, that we all know that like you're called to greatness and glory and fulfillment in your life. And so every single person, we should be helping each other get there. And so why would you not just naturally have these safeguards? But a lot of people view them as an attack and an assumption, which is an interesting reaction for what is almost like it's not hurting you, is it?
Absolutely not. I mean, you know, I think it's about creating a culture of safety, actually. And, you know, I think sometimes there's just resistance to change as well. And I think there are two ways basically to do change. Either you go in and say, this is what's happening, you know, like it or lump it kind of thing. Or you can say, let's bring people in. Let's hear what people want. And we can gradually, but with momentum, create these changes so that it feels like something that everyone's involved in.
Right.
And I think this is the thing, where something's brought in and it seems imposed or something, that's when people tend to react in a negative way, because I think it's largely because they think, who asked you, you know, kind of thing. And so even though they know, I don't think anyone's saying we don't want safeguarding. I think they're saying, we'd love to have some input and also to give our views, you know, and to be asked what's going to happen, you know, what do you need or anything, you know. So I think that's where that sort of reaction comes from, rather than actually not wanting it.
Right, absolutely. No, that makes tons of sense. And it goes back to what we were talking about, which is beginning with, we have a common goal. This isn't about you and me. It's about that common goal.
Exactly.
Absolutely. Well, Stephanie, thank you so much for being on. We end every one of our For Pete's Sake podcasts with a rapid fire round.
Okay.
Are you ready?
I think so.
Okay. All right, Stephanie, thank you once again for being on. Rapid fire round. Question number 1. Favorite pope of all time?
Okay, this is tough. I'm going to say Pope Francis, even though I also love some of the stuff that Pope Paul VI wrote. I'm saying Pope Francis because he's the Pope that I've known for the longest. And I feel close to him, and you know, I've kind of grown up with him also as I matured in my own faith, I suppose, and in my work, in my professional life. He's sort of guided the whole thing. So I'm going to say Pope Francis.
Amazing. I love it. I love it. Question number 2, underrated saint.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So my underrated saint, and my mum will be very happy that I'm saying this saint,
good.
is Saint Scholastica.
Oh, fantastic.
Because firstly, my mum always wants to call me Scholastica. Partly I'm glad that she didn't, because I think it's quite it would be a challenging name to have. Although I do now know somebody called Scholastica. So, I think it's a great name.
Yeah.
But I think she's underrated because... so she was Pope Benedict's twin sister. But Pope Benedict kind of gets the limelight, I suppose. And actually, I have a twin brother as well.
Really?
So I feel this sort of connection. But Saint Scholastica, whereas, in her time, girls would basically have either been at home or married off or whatever. Yeah. She said, no, I'm going to go out and form my own abbey and, like group. She was a hermit for ages, which I can identify with. So anyway, and I feel like more people should know about Saint Scholastica.
I love it, and I completely agree. All right. Most Catholic country, in your opinion?
This is almost impossible to answer. And... when I think about this question, I think, actually, you know what? I have like an ideal of what a Catholic country should be, because obviously you have Catholic countries, but I think the ideal country that I would merit being called the most Catholic is a country which, looks after the people experiencing poverty, marginalization, the vulnerable, as we were saying, people, a country which supports women in leadership, which, mentors young people. All of these, it would be a country which truly lives out all of our principles. But as we know, we're all sinners. And so it's very difficult.
So it will never exist.
Well, I live in hope. I'm an optimist.
I love it. And it's very Catholic. All right. And then finally, to finish it out, and thank you again for coming on, Stephanie, finish this sentence. For Pete's sake, I wish people would just...
admit that you can drink a cappuccino at any time of the day and it doesn't matter.
That is singing to my heart. That is ringing absolutely true. You're a musicologist and you hit the note. That is absolutely accurate. Thank you for coming on, Stephanie. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for having me.
This has been For Pete's Sake Podcast. Join us next week, and if you liked this video, feel free to like and subscribe.